family. Welcome back to the Explore the Extraordinary podcast. My name's Betty, and today I'm joined by Bridget. And Bridget is a near-death experiencer. She's a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling author, and her clients call her the book whisperer. I'm super excited to introduce Bridget to our community. She'll be hosting a workshop on Saturday, May 4th, 2024. If you're watching this in real time, then you might have an opportunity to come and join us for the workshop. And there'll be a link for that workshop in the liner notes of this episode. And I'm just really excited for your willingness to serve our community in so many different ways, Bridget. So I'm going to toss it right over to you to share about your experiences and who you are.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Betty. It's such an honor to be on this show and really enjoy you and the topics that you explore. And I love that you do it unapologetically, because I do find that sometimes when people have had such incredible sacred experiences that it can be difficult, and sometimes they worry that people won't believe them, but you're just blowing this wide open so that people have more of an opportunity. It happens more often than we think. And I feel like that's part of the reason I'm here on the planet as well. And so thank you for this time and opportunity. So I'll tell you a little bit about me. Um, I had three sets of parents by the time I was 6 months old, and was adopted by this incredible couple. And my dad was an engineer, my mom was a teacher, and became a homemaker, but she let me read as many books as I possibly could, which was wonderful. And so when my life seemed boring or there were other things going on, a lot of things that can happen from adoption. There's like a core wound that happens to many of us that doesn't ever feel like it can quite be filled until we do some work. But I didn't know about that. I was just a kid. And so I would just immerse myself in stories. And that is where, my go-to was. However, as I was growing up, I felt like I was always making mistakes. I felt like I, had big dreams, big goals, big ideas of what I wanted to do and be in life. And I always felt like I just never could quite reach that. And a part of it was that core wounding, but it got to the point in my early 20s when I was working three jobs: construction, and then as a night shift worker at a gas station, and a restaurant waitress, just to make it through college. And I was failing, Betty, on every single end. I was failing financially. I was afraid I was going to even, just lose my truck. I was failing at school because I was working so much, was failing in my relationships. I wanted to be this young, single, carefree, partying kind of girl, out there just enjoying life. And what I didn't know was that my stress was causing ulcers and fissures in my colon. And I became full of sepsis, and I didn't know it. I just knew I didn't feel good. And even though I didn't have a great relationship at the time with my mom, she was my go-to when I was sick. And so I drove down this very steep, long canyon, and just holding on by the grit of my teeth until I arrived at my mom's. And she took one look at me and rushed me to the doctor. And I collapsed in the doctor's office, and they're like, whoa, something's wrong. My vitals, everything just fell, just crashed. Luckily, the hospital was right next door. They rushed me into emergency surgery. I had lost 30 pounds in 3 days. I was completely emaciated and just filled with this infection. And they pumped out pints and pints and pints during this exploratory surgery of my abdomen, and got rid of as much of that infection as they could. And I was so emaciated, they had to put me on intravenous antibiotics and what's called subclavian near the heart. And so they put me on these antibiotics. But what I didn't know, was that one of those antibiotics was killing me. I was allergic to it, but I was so ill that everything was just masked. And so I developed really high fevers, 106, 107. They were getting worried about brain damage. There was all kinds of things. My mom was by my side for days. And then she went home finally to get a little bit of rest. And I I couldn't sleep. I was so miserable, so racked in pain, hot and flushed and feeling horrific. And I'm listening to two nurses outside in the corridor, and they're saying, we better call her mom back because she's not going to make it until morning. And I just remember, there's one thing in being really sick, but until that moment, I hadn't faced the fact that I was actually dying, that my spirit was going to slip away from this body and that I wouldn't be here anymore. And I was full of so much sadness because I knew I had not fulfilled the measure of my creation. I had no idea what that was. I didn't know what that meant. I just, from the deepest parts of me, I knew I hadn't fulfilled it. And I was so sad. And I had a couple of things that happened. I was given a blessing by a priest and by a clergy member from another religion, and I fell asleep for a little while, and then I woke up. Still get emotional about it. I woke up to this most beautiful, amazing presence. There were actually two in the room, this beautiful light being that was kind of standing in the corner watching over everything. But this one being that was, to me, um, irreplaceable, undeniable. He was full of so much unconditional love and so bright. And in his presence, what I can tell you is that like this unconditional love was tangible. It permeated every cell in my body. It was making every cell vibrate to his love. And I'd been very loved by my adoptive parents like crazy, by my siblings like crazy, and I also drove them crazy. But I had never experienced this level of love before. And everything in my hospital room was vibrating with this love. I remember the metal tray table, that they would slide over to give you ice chips or whatever. Um, every atom in that table was vibrating with his love. It was the craziest, most beautiful thing. And what I loved about it too was I had all this knowledge in his presence. I knew for a moment who I was in his presence, and I was deeply loved. He didn't care how much money I made or wasn't making. He didn't care how much debt I was in. He didn't care about my failing grades, my failing relationships. He just loved me for me. And um, it changed me. He also let me know I was being given a second chance at life. And that was so extraordinary because just hours before, I knew I was a goner. And so to be able to have this second chance, I knew was a complete and total miracle. And so he left. I fell back this time into a real sleep, the first one I'd had in days. And when I woke up, the nurses, she's bringing in 6 or 7 more of these intravenous antibiotics. And I looked at all of them and I said, I can have every one of these, but I can't have this one. And what I think is important for people to know is like, up until that time, I was taught you do not speak against authority. You never talk back to a doctor of all things. Someone who is over you or is his learned, you don't ever talk back to them. But I said, I can't have this one. It's killing me. Well, she thought I was a French fry shy of a Happy Meal. So she takes off to talk to the doctor. And fortunately, for me, he'd had other patients who'd had near-death experiences. He came to talk to me, asked me questions, and I said, I just know I cannot have this one. It's killing me. So he looked at the nurse and he says, well, she's on all these others. We can take her off this one. and we'll see how she does. And I walked out of the hospital in the next 24 hours under my own power. And he's like, how did you know that? And I said, I can't tell you because I couldn't remember that words came to me. I just knew. And so um, there were a couple of beautiful things that happened from that experience. One was for the very first time in my entire life, I could look into the mirror and see love there, like in my own eyes. And I'd never had that experience. In fact, I was often, a little downcast. But the coolest thing was that I could look at any human on the planet and I could see love there, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. It was like I was gifted to be able to see just a little bit through the eyes of God of who a person really is. And then when they would speak to me and begin to tell me their stories, it's like I could see the threads of their stories playing out before my eyes. And that was really beautiful and extraordinary. So it sent me on a journey and into some of the darkest places of humankind, which was surprising to me because for the longest time I would stay away, from anything that other people or myself might perceive as darkness, violence, darker stories, any of those kinds of things. But what happened was I was being of service at the YMCA volunteering, and there were a group of young kids that came in to play basketball, and I just loved them. Didn't care what skin color they were, what was going on with them. I was just hanging out with them, asking them questions about their lives, seeing their stories, looking at the light in their eyes. And a gentleman noticed that, and he said, "Would you come work for my company?" And I said, what do you mean? Because he'd seen some of my writing for the YMCA, and he's like, "I'd like you to be my public relations director for community learning centers. I work with high risk youth and gang kids. These are some of them." And I was like, oh, to work with more of these kids who I could see, had come from really rough backgrounds, but I could see the light in their eyes. So I began telling some of their stories, the kids that, mom and dad are gang members and grandma and grandpa gang members, and it was like their religion. But I could also see when someone loved them enough to teach them a different way, and when they would grasp it, when that moment that they would say, "Oh, I don't have to live the history or the violence that other people, are saying this is the only way. There's, 360 degrees of glory." I would have the opportunity to capture that, put it on paper, and I'll tell you what, I fell in love with the human soul. And it brought me to my first book called Skinhead Confessions: From Hate to Hope. There's a whole other story about that because I dreamed about it thinking it was a fictional novel, wrote for hours and hours and hours and hours, and kept having to put it away because I was a young mom at the time. And then come to find out that the hero of my story was real. And he was looking for someone to write his life story. So that led me to my first book. And then I had a woman who reached out to me who read The Hate to Hope in that book. And she said, "I think if someone could take a story of so much darkness and create one of hope and healing, it would be you." And then she said, "My name is Melissa Moore, and I am the daughter of the happy face serial killer. Would you write my life story?" And I just remember looking at that email and being absolutely dumbfounded because, my first thought from the ego was, how in the world would I ever write a story of hope and healing about a serial killer's daughter? But just like my other experiences, when she would talk and I would really listen, I could see the threads of story. And I also prayed for guidance. And one day I was in the shower, and a lot of people get, guidance when the water is falling. And I was listening to a song called Child of Light, and the words flowed through me not of the song, but of the book that we would write together, that it did not have to be this salacious, horrific true crime novel, that instead it would be Melissa's real memoir of what it was like to grow up not knowing that your father is a serial killer, and then what it was like for her to find it, but also what it was like for her to find and claim back her power. It was an incredible story of transformation from dark into so much light. And this is what I have found from people that I have the opportunity to work with, is those who have struggled with pain or tragedy or darkness also have this like pendulum swing. They have the ability and the penchant to hold so much light. And so it was a great lesson for me. And I went on to write a book about the 19th wife of 65 women living right here in our country, and how she overcame the darkness of her upbringing and the fixed beliefs in that system to learn how to love God again, but also how she just was so strong. She became the face of the faceless and the voice of the voiceless in the courtroom for little girls as young as 12 that were being trafficked in the name of God. And she helped dismantle an entire organized crime unit in the name of God. And she changed my life forever. It was amazing. And I saw the power of one person to change the world. And she'd had many sacred experiences. And so I love I love it when people have the courage to share sacred like you do, Betty. I love that when people are brave enough and bold enough to share this whole other spectrum of our humanity, the bigger picture of who we are and what is possible inside of us, but also what is possible when we share with one another. I think it's extraordinary. And I've read a lot of studies about, how these stories actually help to heal people and bring them hope, kids in college and other places, that all of a sudden it's like, oh, they're able to see, a broader sense of who they are, and that there is a purpose for them on the planet. And I absolutely love that. So that's a little about me.
Wow, thank you so much. You're such an encapsulating speaker. I like barely wrote anything down because you were just like so comprehensive in all of it. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for your service to the collective, what you're doing, how you're helping people share their stories. Because yeah, you're right. It is so impactful, and it does really exercise that spiritual principle of courage. And as we express our courage, other people are invisibly given permission to also express their courage. And I think that that's so profound. So I'm wondering if maybe you can share a little bit about what it is that you do, maybe not with people who have like these super kind of sensationalized stories like the ones that you just mentioned, but just kind of regular people who are on the path to wanting to write a memoir and share their story with the world.
Oh, I'd love to. I just within the last several months, I helped a friend. His name is Lindsay Coleman, and he also had a near-death experience that was just so extraordinary. But throughout his life, like, he grew up as a scrapper, and very poor, and his father was an alcoholic and would beat him and beat other members of the family. And he just, he'd have to go to work at 8 years of age in order to get tennis shoes to wear to school. And all the things in life that people told him he could never do or never be enough was what he really decided to go after. And so he has this vivaciousness for life, which is amazing. But he also faced, besides these fixed beliefs, certain things that happen. He was in an accident, almost lost his leg. And, he just said, no, you will not take my leg. I will remain vital and robust. And so he did. And, but there came a point he got almost like COVID, but before COVID was the thing. And they couldn't figure it out. And they finally put him into a coma, and then told his wife that she should let him go. And she's like, you don't know my husband. You just don't know Lindsay. And that will be between him and God. And while he was in that coma, he had some of the most extraordinary experiences. So here he is, this everyday man. He gets out of his coma and he says, Bridget, I want to write my experience. I want people to know about, you know, here he was in the hospital. They're doing CPR on him because they're about to lose him and it's Christmas night. And he can hear his wife around the corner had been asked to leave the room, and she was with her sister and she's just sobbing. He left his body to go make sure that she was okay and saw everything that happened, including when the doctor came out to talk to her and let her know that Lindsay had been saved. And he knew word for word for word that conversation. And it was clear around the corner and into this little alcove. And there's no way. And when he got out of his coma and he told her about that, she was just, Lindsay, you have to tell people. So Lindsay came to my Inspired Writers Retreat. He'd never been a writer. He'd always been a businessman, had no idea of how to write a story. And so what I tell everyone to begin with is, everyone has an extraordinary story, and you've probably been heard that, have heard that, but the thing of it is we don't chronicle it. We don't write it down. We don't acknowledge it to ourselves. So how in the world can we tell other people? And so I had him write a chronology of his story. And then he began to witness for himself just how extraordinary it was, like the patterns of being this kid, being told that he could not do much, not have much, not experience much, that he should keep his expectations really small, and how his heart just kept saying, there is more to life, more material wealth, yes, but also more passion, more joy, other things, more laughter. And so how he saw where he grew the most, where he expanded the most, also chronicling his harder times in the hospitals, when the doctors are saying, you're going to lose your leg. You'll never be able to have children. Some of these things that he was up against, and how he was able to really tap into the extraordinariness of being here on the planet and being alive. And so chronology is one of the most important things that any of us can do. And I love to help people see the extraordinariness of their story. So I have writers retreats, and I also work with people one-on-one every couple of weeks, so that there's that added accountability as you're writing your story. But what I'm often really looking for too are the threads of those stories that make each one of us so authentic and remarkable. Because sometimes, every person writing their story gets into a little imposter syndrome. It's already been written, or it's been written better. Somebody's already done this. And here's the thing is, you could put 100 people in a room and ask them to write a book about leadership, and you would have 100 distinctly different books if they took the time enough to delve into their stories, delve into their experiences and situations. And this is true of near death, of out of body experiences, of shared death, of other mystical experiences as well. Like, it is our uniqueness. It's often the things that happened before and the beliefs that we had and were holding until we have these beautiful mystical experiences. And then what did it do inside of us? Where did it shift us? Where did it change us? Where did it move our hearts to look at the world, to look at ourselves in a different way, to tell even a different story? So I know the story I was telling myself before that beautiful presence came into my room. And I know the story that I began to tell when I came out. And then to see, Betty, just to see too what happens with a person when they begin to own the power of their own story is really extraordinary. I see another shift that happens inside of them because it's like they become the witness of the gift they are. And I don't mean that in an egoic sense at all. In fact, most people who have mystical experiences, their ego goes because it just doesn't have room so much anymore. You know, they get what's important. They know what is real and what is not. And sometimes these spiritual things are more real than anything they have ever experienced in their life. I know that it was for me. And and so to be able to witness to yourself the extraordinariness of what you have to offer on the hero's journey, and I know you're aware of this, Betty. You know, people go on this hero's journey and there is a death of themselves all along the way. But when they come back into the ordinary world, they hold, often for the first time in their lives, an elixir of life that they have earned along the way with this knowledge, this experience, but it is now a gift that they can share with other people. And so I really love when people finally see within themselves the hero or shero of their own story, the gift that they have to bring back to the world in a very humble and beautiful way. And these extraordinary stories, ordinary people having extraordinary experiences and choosing to open their hearts and share them with the world, that is where I see the world is changing.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So many things are coming up for me while you're talking. I'm not sure which question I want to conceptualize. One of the things that came up for me is, do you have any sort of conception on why certain stories happen in certain people's lives? So, yeah, I have a deep knowing in pre-birth planning. I'm wondering if you are aware of that theory or if you believe in it. You know, there's a lot of people that come in the comments, especially on near-death experience podcasts, and they say, I wish I had a near-death experience, or why didn't this happen to me? Why does it happen to them? And I'm just curious if you have any sort of conception around that.
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that one question, Betty. I love it. Um, first of all, I would say that I have come to realize that there's just too many synchronicities and certain things, and people I have come across where it's like, I know you. I know you. And we'd never met before, like in physical form, but I know them. And there is a connection there. And and also in people's books and stories and in what they share with me, oftentimes people will share with me things that they've never shared with another soul on the planet, not a parent, not a spouse, not a child. They'll just pour out their stories. So I'm a vault, you know, I'm just very careful. And then whatever they decide they're going to reveal in their stories. But I see like where people show up for each other in what could be called sacred contracts, and and how they show up in extraordinary ways, sometimes teaching us what to be, oftentimes teaching us what not to be. And I feel like, wow, we there is a greater plan among us and a greater agreement. And we still have all, I mean, I think the greatest power is free agency. I think it is huge. I think it is remarkable. I think it is wonderful. And I also think that that we came here to learn and to grow, and that we have these spiritual contracts where we show up for one another in extraordinary ways. Anyway, to me, it's fascinating. I have done I've done a lot of research on the tree of life, which is fascinating because I have my own distinct spiritual and religious backgrounds. You know, I have enough guilt to be a Jewish princess, but it is the things that are that we have in common to fascinate me. And the tree of life is one of those things that is in almost every single religious capacity, if you go back far enough, and almost every single culture on the planet, there is artwork, depiction, stories, mythologies, written scriptures, etc., about the tree of life, and how our our stories, our roots, our trunks, our branches, the gifts we have for the world, our seeds and flowers and other things. Um, these are there's so much of that we have in common. And it's so fascinating to me too, Betty, because of being able to have, like, every time I have a judgment, God will bring me a story. Every time there is something I'm studying and I don't understand enough about, God will bring me a story. There will be something to research. There will be something to discover. And so I have compared to where I was, right? When I was in the hospital, I had this very narrow worldview and universal view to where I am today. And I'm a baby. I realize I don't know anything and I love to absorb and to figure out. But the world is more beautifully complex, rich, full. We see this much, and there is so much more going on. So I love that to you. It's like you've had these experiences and you have yeah, it makes me want to ask you all kinds of, like, 1,000 questions. And so I will just say, I know that I don't know everything, and I'm insatiably learning more and more each day.
I love that, because that is the spiritual principle of humility. And I think that that's such a beautiful one to be able to encapsulate, I feel like for me on my own spiritual journey, when I first came into spiritual awareness, I was nothing but self-righteous. I was like, I hold the key to the universe. I know all. And it really took the universe humbling me, like throwing spiritual bricks at my face, like how you just said, sending me stories like, oh, I don't know anything. Oh, it's much vaster than I could ever actually comprehend. So let me just take a seat and not let me just like let somebody else drive the car for a while. I really love that. So I'm wondering if well, I heard you say that you are a mom, and I always love asking people this. What is it like to be a conscious parent? You have a lot of awareness. So how does that play into your parenting?
Oh, wow. That is really beautiful question, and thank you. And it's another place where I don't know so much. But I'm constantly learning and trying to do better every day. And I think that's an important thing for all of us to realize is no matter where we come from, and if you're a parent, it means that you're making mistakes every single day. It also means that every time you wake up, you have a brand new opportunity to do something extraordinary with the people that you love. And I will share that after that near-death experience, and then I had been so full of all of that sepsis and infection and other things, and it also had gotten into, and I had scar tissue around my reproductive organs, and they put me on a birth control shot. They said, we don't think that you'll ever have children. And I gave birth to three beautiful children, and I have a bonus daughter. And I also have three incredible grandchildren. And so number one is don't believe everything you hear from doctors. They don't know everything. And to learn how to trust in your own body. And also maybe these contracts, because I saw my daughter, I thought she was a son because she's in like this black and white and yellow little outfit and had no hair, but I saw a vision of her playing in the sun before I got pregnant. And then one day after she was born, and we were in this totally different house in Denver where I was working with these gang kids and high-risk youth. And anyway, so I'm at home and I'm seeing just the dust motes playing in the sunshine in this old house. And she's sitting playing happily with her toes in the middle of the sun. And I'm like, that is what I saw last year when they said you will never have children. And so honestly, I did not take that for granted. And remember, big goals and big dreams. Like I'd taken international relations, public administration, political science. I had 2 degrees and a couple of minors, one in Russian. I wanted to be an envoy in Washington, D.C. and work my way up into, being an ambassador. And I felt like there was so much that could happen between Russia which was at the time the Soviet Union and the United States, and that's where I wanted to spend my time. But when I was given the gift of a child, I said, I'm not going to take this for granted. And so that's when I really started writing. And it was so I could be at home with her. And I was able to be at home with all three of my children when they were young. And it was so formative. And I had other experiences like many of us do. I got out of an abusive marriage, made sure my children were safe, and had to be single mom for a while. And it was rough, as a lot of single parents find, where you're balancing so many different priorities. And sometimes you're having to focus on food on the table and a roof over their head. And so the joyful minute to minute mom that I had been able to be before, was not able to be there all the time. But I learned and grew through that experience. And now I feel like I can be more present with my kids, through their hardships as well as through their joys. And I also know, it is a day to day relationship building. They're out of the house, they're being adults, they're doing adult things. Sometimes mom's just mom, right? Mom's just mom. I'll call her back when I've got a minute, kind of thing. But when we get together, like, oh, we just went racing for my husband's birthday. And so we're all in go-karts. So we were having a blast. And, just the joy of watching them express themselves. And so one of the things I think when we acknowledge the sacred is how sacred another human being is that is placed in our care. And and how some human beings placed in care are not placed in care, and how we can have come to have huge compassion for those who were hurt when they were young, and help them to grow and to know that there's something greater on the planet for them too. So sorry, you can tell I get passionate about these things. I can go on
I
and
love
on.
your passion. Thank you. I could literally talk to you all day. I feel like I made a new friend. I'm so excited. And I do get to listen to you talk more on Saturday, May 4th, little promo. Did you see what I did there? It was like very seamless, but now I'm talking about
Very
it
seamless.
so messy. So yeah, and the link to that workshop will be in the liner notes of this episode. It's so enjoyed getting to know you, and thank you for being vulnerable and authentic and sharing today. And I just want to see if there's anything else that you'd like to share to feel more complete about our time together.
Just, I want to thank you again for your courage to share these kinds of stories. And, if you've happened upon this podcast today, Betty has so many other episodes for which, that I would suggest that you enjoy. But if you were to take anything away from today, as Harold Goddard said, the destiny of the world is determined less by the battles lost and won than by the stories it loves and believes in. And what I would love to share with you is the destiny of your world is determined less by the battles lost and won than by the stories you love and believe in. The only question is, are those of limitations or possibilities? And I would love for those to be possibilities.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Bridget. And we'll see you on Saturday, May 4th, if you're watching this in real time. And if not, we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.